back at the APOR conference with Jeff Jones, the managing editor at the Gallup poll, who presented a paper here on the use of the generic ballot question to predict the outcome of House seats, the U.S. House of Representatives. So just in case there's anybody listening to this who doesn't know what the generic vote is, what is that?
It's a measure of voting intention for Congress, and because we have 435 districts with different candidates, we just ask if you're going to plan to vote for the Republican candidate in your district or the Democratic candidate in your district. And a lot of people think, well, how useful is that? But if you look at how it's performed in the past compared to what the actual vote was for Democratic and Republican candidates, it's proven to be very accurate in midterm elections.
Okay, so you've built a statistical model, or you're using a statistical model to predict House seats. Can you just say a little bit? I mean, we don't need to get into Greek lettering and all that, but what's in the model? How does it work?
Well, the model takes the share of the votes, which we have for past elections, and then we can substitute the generic ballot estimate from the current election in that. And, seats and votes generally are pretty close, but, so what's really driving it is the share of the vote for Democrats. In that model, we have a few variables in there to account for the majority party in Congress and the president's party, because that seems to affect the estimates a little bit, so that's a better model than just using the vote by itself.
So how good does the model do in predicting past elections? I mean, you can use the statistic, the percent of the variance that's explained.
Well, the way I look at it is we go back in time. You can use the model retrospectively. Right. So, for example, I went back to 1990, and I used all the data from 1946 up until the election prior to that. So you go back, and between 1990 and 2006, making predictions using the generic ballot for that election. The average error from the prediction has been 6 seats, so It is pretty accurate. Maybe you might want to extend that to 12 seats to account for 2 standard deviations,
right.
But it has been pretty accurate in predicting that.
And that's using the actual vote to predict the outcome. So now we're using the generic, and you're saying that the generic at the end of the campaign is pretty accurate. What's your sense of how accurate it is if the election were held today in May?
It's hard to say, because right now we're just measuring registered voters, and the likely voter model tends to have more effect on the generic ballot than it does on the presidential ballot. Right now, the registered vote is running about even. Typically, Republicans have an advantage, so that would argue that right now it looks like a better Republican year. I mean, the numbers we're finding now in the generic ballot are similar to what we found in 1994, so that might give you a sense of what we're looking at. If you take the current generic ballot for registered voters and you assume a typical turnout, which would give 4 points to the Republicans once you apply the likely voter model, we're right on the edge there where they could take over control. But given model error prediction, I wouldn't go quite that far with that prediction, but it looks like it's going to be pretty close.
Right. One last thing. I know that you've been, that Gallup has an election page where you're doing at least a weekly update on the generic ballot and a chart and all the rest. Are you going to be posting this model or updating it at all on Gallup.com?
I think we'll probably publish a prediction at the end of the campaign.
Right.
We did that in 2006. That was the first time we used this model to make a prediction in a current election. So we probably will do something similar to that, but I don't know if we'll constantly be updating, projections on seats. It's possible. We haven't made a final decision, but definitely at the end, I think we'll do something.
All right, Jeff Jones from Gallup, thank you very much.
Thank you.